Mounce, BBG, chapter 24, sentence 3. All right, folks, the first thing you want to see right here after the and is this verb that you will see quite often if you're doing any work with narratives in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels where there is storytelling going on. Very, very common, to start the story this way with this particular verb. And hopefully you recognize that it comes from ginomai. And when you look at the aorist of ginomai, what you see is egonamain. So you know that it is deponent. All right. So, you recognize this is your augment. You realize this is your third singular ending, right? So, but again, from ginomai, so that's not to be confused just because that went to an epsilon. And that's part of why it's important to kind of look at your stems and kind of get an idea of how those stems change form. And one of the reasons I put it on that freaky verbs sheet. So, feel free to look that over again. But bottom line here is you got a third singular aorist, and you do have the augment from ginomai. And the way you're going to translate this is, again, this is a way you introduce, story, kind of like what we do when we say long, long time ago, or, or once upon a time, those kinds of things. This is a very common verb to do that. And, you can translate it any number of ways. It was in those days, but that's kind of awkward. So it happened in those days. It came about in those days. Any of those are workable. It happened. It happened in those days. Like I said, there are several ways you can play with ginomai, and if you look up ginomai in the lexicon, you'll see that it's pretty broad range. But the idea is that we're going to start the story, and here's how we're going to start the story. So it came about, I think, is probably the way I would run with something like this, and it came about in those days, right? So you got your far demonstrative there, modifying days. And if I were to ask you why these were in the dative plural, again, you'd want to just say, well, obviously, object to the preposition en. A very easy answer. So, it's one that you don't want to make more difficult than it is. Preposition en can take the dative. So there you go. All right, and it came about in those days, and then you have your subject after this verb. So, treat these together because you already have a verb here, and it came about in those days. Then you have Jesus, and then either came or went, right? So, and this one, you're going to want to remember that this is one of those freaky verbs. It goes, from erkamai to elusmai to elthon. So as soon as you don't see elthon but elthen, you're dealing with a third singular. Third singular lines up with Jesus as the subject, so you have subject-verb agreement. And then either came or went, again, this is a question of perspective, whether you want to use came or went, and who's writing the book and what their perspective was on whether Jesus was coming or going. So in any case, Jesus went from Nazareth, right? Now, your tendency is you're going to look at something like this and you're going to say from Nazareth to Galilee. Well, wrong. Look, here you're dealing with a genitive, right? So, in your head, you might be doing that whole directional thing, but, be very, very careful to look at your case, right? So as soon as you see case here, you say, well, genitive. So Jesus went from Nazareth of Galilee, right? So from Nazareth of Galilee. All right. So then we move on to the next clause, and then you have a verb here with, you see that theta, baptizo, right? So you know baptizos, then you see the augment. The augment helps you know it's secondary tense, but then you also see that theta. Well, boom, you're dealing with a passive. So you know you're dealing with an aorist passive right here simply because you've got the augment and the theta. And then in the absence of any other ending, you say, well, that's got to be a third singular. So in the absence of any other subject, you say, well, it's referring back to, that near antecedent, Jesus. So then you're going to translate it as he. So, but then as an aorist passive, he was baptized, right? So again, an aorist passive. He was baptized in the Jordan. And again, if I were to say, why is Jordan in the accusative case? Well, object of the preposition ace. That's all you need to say, and you're just fine. So he was baptized in the Jordan, and again, hopefully you see hupo and you say by, and then John. Easy enough. So, and it came about in those days, Jesus went from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized in the Jordan by John.